Good morning, everyone. Whoa, that works really well. Yes, exactly. Would like to say hello to the folks that have joined us today. We are in Grant County, Oregon. Excited to be in John Day. We went on a tour this morning and saw some of the projects and the work that's being done in the community. Wanted to first and foremost just say that getting out to the eastern part of the state is always a pleasure for us on the commission. The thing that is first in front of every decision, and it seems like just with every project or any issue that comes up, is the fact that you are capable of putting together partnerships and making things happen when it just doesn't seem like anything other than short of a miracle is going to help things move forward. And so as we get around the state, it's always a pleasure to see how those partnerships and how that commitment to community is being played out. And we have the mayor here this morning, Mayor Limbam, who wants to greet us, and we're just thrilled to be in your community. So thank you.
My privilege to welcome everybody to John Day, Grant County, and specifically the airport here. Project that I'm proud of. I'm part of the Airport Commission too, and I'd like to thank Connect Oregon maybe for helping make all of this possible. We've been recipient of 5 Connect Oregon grants and to the tune of about $10 million, so this is the result of that. So also, I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming again. We got some cool things happening in John Day, so it's neat that you guys happen to come and tour the area. So some cool things are going to be happening in the city in the near future, and we got a great city manager. I think he's going to give a presentation this afternoon. So again, welcome, and if there's anything we can do to make your afternoon better, let me know. So
a few of us got out to the fair, so thank you for hosting your fair at the same time that we are in town.
Yes, it's a big deal for us. So one of the longest running fairs in the state. So
maybe the Ferris wheel.
Well, yeah, we'll get us on the Ferris wheel and maybe a corn dog later.
We got to have one of the fair hamburgers.
A fair hamburger, okay.
They're one of the claim to fame around here. So again, welcome everybody, and I hope the afternoon goes well for you. So,
excellent. And I know you have a lot going on. Join us when you can.
I will.
And we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks
Thank you.
again.
Yes. Director Garrett, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate this opportunity, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the welcome here. I have 3 things I'd like to share with the Commission in this report. The first is actually sharing with the Commission that we are preparing for the September legislative days. Now, those days take place beginning Monday, September 24th, and run through the 26th. And as of today, what we know right now, we've been asked to appear before several committees, and there are some specific issues. What we know right now is the Commission has been asked to report on value pricing, a significant conversation that'll play itself out a little later today. The Commission also will be asked to speak about some of the enhanced accountability efforts that came from House Bill 2017 and how the Commission engaged this agency in that conversation. We've been asked to give a major transportation project update, as well as a conversation surrounding the transfer of rest areas to the Oregon Travel Information Council. That is a conversation that will take place in front of the Joint Committee on Transportation on Tuesday. As we roll into Wednesday, we have a couple opportunities that play themselves out. The first is with the House Transportation Committee. Again, they've asked for a major projects update. They want to speak about jurisdictional transfer, orphan highways. I think this is going to be a specific conversation about 82nd Avenue up in the Portland metropolitan area. And then they want an update on the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force and the work those good folks have done. And then finally, what we've been asked to come before the Senate Veterans and Emergency Preparedness Committee on Wednesday as well to speak to seismic triage in southern Oregon. It was a $35 million investment made coming out of House Bill 2017, and we'll certainly share that. So we are preparing. We will continue to have conversations as an agency in our preparations, and then given the fact that the Commission has a couple opportunities to share their thoughts, we'll make sure we'll continue to work with the Commission to prepare as we move toward those September legislative days. Very quickly, moving to the world of motor carrier. So as of August 2nd, motor carriers have completed a total of 10 million transactions using the 24/7 trucking online service. This is a 15-year-old effort, and we clipped that milestone of 10 million transactions earlier this month. This is the second, what I would call a significant milestone. We've achieved this year in the motor carrier portfolio. You may recall that our weigh-in motion system, the green light system, hit its its 25th million, I think that's right, bypass earlier this year as well. Specific to Trucking Online, more than 31,000 motor carriers have signed up to use this system since we engaged back in 2003. This online site is available 24/7 when everything's up and running. We had a little hitch in the get-along a couple days ago, but it is to be available 24/7 to allow carriers a convenient way to conduct business as they pay their taxes, get their permits, renew their plates, and much more. So kudos to the folks at Motor Carrier and their relationship with the trucking industry. And then finally, the 6th Annual Oregon Coastal Caucus Economic Summit convenes next week, and I have the privilege of being on a transportation carbon reduction panel that is moderated by State Representative Caddy McEwen. It's an august group, save me, but an august group that includes Senator Cliff Bent, Senator Michael Dembrow, Coos County Commissioner Melissa Cribben, and DEQ Director Richard Whitman. My comments, so you know, are based on another conversation that will play itself out a little later today, the statewide transportation strategy, that vision that this commission and this agency and our sister agencies have been engaged on and working on since about the 2010 timeframe. As I said, we'll have a conversation about the adoption of the STS into our Oregon Transportation Plan a little bit later. But the foundation of my comments will be related to the agency's role, ODOT's role in achieving emission reductions, as well as the opportunities and I think obligations that our sister states have, and they are embedded and articulated in the STS as we're speaking specifically about the transportation sector. I believe this STS provides a perfect jump-off point to engage questions such as what's the state's current effort to reduce carbon within the transportation sector? What do you see as the next step in the process? And then finally, how do the policies impact varying populations and communities across the state of Oregon? Pretty heady topic. We know we will engage in this conversation, but this conversation will continue and move into the 2019 legislative session. So we'll have that opportunity. And again, I will certainly go to school on the conversation that plays itself out a little later today in terms of the adoption of the STS, and I will probably embed that in some of my comments as well. Madam Chair, with that, I'll stand down.
Okay. At this point, I don't have anyone signed up for public comment, but I would throw it out to the group. Would anyone like to address the commission on any item? And seeing that the crowd goes wild, we will move on to the next topic I'm sure that is of interest to many of you in the room. Transportation in the state of Oregon, listening to communities about what the challenges were. One of the top 4 challenges in the state of Oregon is congestion in the Portland metropolitan area. And we heard that in Lakeview, we heard that here in Grant County, and it was important for us to be looking at what that might mean in terms of addressing congestion. So the legislature in House Bill 2017 gave a directive to this commission to move forward with investigating what that might look like in certain parts of that region. So today we will be receiving an update from the Value Pricing Committee and from our team, and looking forward to what those next steps are. So I would like Judith and Ryan to come forward and walk us through this important conversation. And I also would like to take a moment and again thank my colleagues, Commissioner O'Halloran and Simpson, for their 49% and 51% share of leading that group toward a great set of recommendations and a very spirited dialogue. It is not easy to bring together that many individuals in a room talking about something such as value pricing and what that might mean. So kudos to you and thank you for taking on that leadership role. So would you like me to, Ryan, would you like to take over the lead?
Thank you, Chair Boehne. I'm Ryan Winsheimer. I'm the ODOT Region 1 Manager, and we are very excited to be here today to, again, give you an update as to where we are on the pricing conversation. And I'd like to start by saying I appreciate the Chair's comments as in framing this up in terms of what the rest of the bill and what that means and the direction, and really the objective of this, which is how are we going to manage congestion into the future. It's not being done sort of in a vacuum, but it's being done as part of a comprehensive approach, multimodal approach, and a lot of investment in other areas. And this is just one more tool as we continue to move this discussion forward. So thank you for that. I would, I guess, first like to just make sure you know who else is up here at the table with me. I've got Judith Gray. She's our value pricing project manager. She's been very engaged in leading the PAC and making presentations to many of our partners and helping us solicit public comment and being very involved in directing that. And we also have David Ungama, who's with WSP. He's our tolling consultant, and he's brought a lot of very in-depth knowledge about tolling and how it works and how it may be applied to where we got today. So moving forward, again, I also would like to look back just a little bit and saying it has been about a year since you directed us to convene the PAC and to come back to you with their information. It's hard to believe we've been at this for a year. It's gone fast. It's been a lot of work in a very short time. We've come to you a couple of times here with some updates, and we are now seeking your direction in terms of our application to FHWA. And I'd also like to thank Commissioners O'Halloran and Simpson for leading that PAC effort and really helping get us to this point that we are now prepared to move forward. Just as a reminder, as you move to accept the PAC's recommendation and their report, I just wanted to let you know at the very end of what has been a very long effort that's included that you got of public comments, but 200 pages of comments that we've received online through emails and other things as we have been engaging the community out there. So today we're going to be asking for two separate actions. One is to direct us to move forward with our application, and that is really trying to help us work with FHWA in framing our I-5 and I-205 projects and what we'd like to bring back this application in November and really seek some final approval of that. So this is not a final action. This is really giving us the direction to move forward with our application. And the second action we'd like today is direction in moving forward to begin developing an approach and scope for the system-wide look at pricing, and you're going to hear more about that from Judith. Just as a reminder, this is the initial direction that we are seeking. You are required to move forward with FHWA approval to implement value pricing by December 31st. This does not mean begin tolling. It's very important to keep reminding folks, this is not the end of the process. This is the very beginning. And this is our application is essentially asking FHWA concurrence that we've got the appropriate steps in place, that we've laid out a good process for analysis that will lead to approval some years here in the future. So today, again, we've asking for two different actions to begin developing our application and then moving forward based on what we heard, very strong interest from PAC members, from the public, and from several of you in taking a broader system-wide approach to looking at planning and begin development of that and bring that back as well in November. The PAC recommendation, I'm going to move very quickly through this as you guys are very familiar with this, but was to have a project on advancing these two initial projects for some further study, I-5 area through the Rose Quarter and the I-205 section down by the George Abernathy Bridge, really as a tool for providing construction funds for the construction of that bridge and the additional lanes. The hash marks, again, identify that we do not know the exact end of the termini of these projects, and that will be, again, analyzed as we move forward. Our approach will be to go into greater detail as to how ODOT and FHWA will study and analyze this approach and the mitigation priorities for further study. Again, there will be quite a bit more work to be done over the next several years. You may recall seeing our roadmap graphic showing a number of additional stages. Our application will be seeking FHWA concurrence on the processes and the requirements for moving forward. It will help identify process components, estimated timelines, and costs. We want to balance the desire for a streamlined process, which we are hearing folks would like us to move very quickly, but making sure that we have strong analysis, public input, coordination, and that we're making sure we're addressing any impacts that we may encounter. As we begin these steps, we will be looking for, and this is following sort of the FHWA concurrence. Once they give us the direction as to what our next steps are, these are the kinds of things that we'll be studying in more analysis. And with that, again, what we're asking for today is really your direction in terms of how to move forward with our application to FHWA, which is about identifying what are the next steps. How are we going to go about answering the questions that many folks have raised in a way that's defensible for ODOT, for FHWA, and engaging the public as we do that. And as we move forward to do that and seeking your concurrence, we're also looking for some direction. I know that the commission has some interest in some policy things that they would like to express, and we want to make sure that we get that direction so that we can incorporate it in that application that we're going to bring back for final approval in November. And so with that, I'll stop and look for some direction from the commission.
So I think for us, I'd like to facilitate a dialogue and in a quasi-casual sort of way. So because part of that is the back and forth. So do we want to turn the lights up a bit? Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mac. So first of all, thank you very much for your commitment and dedication to this process too, and getting us to where we are. So I'd open it up to commission members in terms of and I would first like to look to both the members that sat on the PAC. Any initial comments that you'd like to start the conversation off? Okay.
So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ryan, Judith. Thank you guys for all the work that you've done on this. And to be clear, I mean, I think we have given lots of stakeholders opportunity to voice their concerns. And I think going back to Governor Kitzhaber and Governor Brown's work on the vision panels, there were a number of universal requests that came forward out of that. But one of the learnings for us was that Portland congestion was a statewide issue, that people from all over the state wanted to get goods and products and through Portland, and even it was becoming an economic burden to have to deal with Portland traffic. People would not go out to dinner because they didn't want to deal with traffic or whatever. So we were challenged with do something about congestion. The facts are that the rate of population growth has far exceeded our investment in a transportation network to accommodate those people. We have not done enough to create alternatives, to incentivize carpooling, transit, bus, other ways to get around that space. And when we look at congestion, the legislation directs us to look at I-5 and I-205. The reality is Portland congestion is much more. And I think that when we look to other communities who have implemented congestion pricing and tolling, and I think what we're talking about is trying to create incentives for people to think differently about how they get around. We want to have a user fee-based system where those who benefit from transportation infrastructure are those who are using the system, and therefore they should be the people who are paying into it. And I think we've heard that we have to do something about this congestion, and our options are limited. So I think when we look globally about it, pricing that congestion is one way. We can have, and there are a lot of ways to do that. We can have variable pricing where it's more expensive during certain peak hours. But I think we need to look at a much broader network beyond I-205 and I-5. We need to look at where the true congestion is, all the paths into Portland, diversion. Cars, people trying to find a path around having to pay for that pricing. And so they'll go onto neighborhood streets, they'll go onto ulterior motives, get off highways. So diversion is happening now. People are stuck in traffic and they go off the highway to try to get around it. Pushes them through neighborhoods sometimes. We have programs like Waze that are looking to where we have capacity that's not being utilized and putting cars on it. So diversion's happening now. But I think with a toll system, if it's going to fuel more of it, we have to look, what do you do to prevent that? And in my view, you create a donut, a beltway, a loop that doesn't have gaps in it. And in Portland, that would include Interstate 84, Interstate 26, 405, 5 pieces of perhaps, I think it's Route 30, that I think you need to look at. How do you make a complete loop around the Portland metropolitan area that prices that congestion, and that we are looking very seriously to what alternatives people have to get around that same property? Are we incentivizing carpooling to the max? Are we creating ways for people to get around? And I think that should be something we look at. I think there's been a lot of concern raised about if we toll and if we do congestion pricing, what happens to that revenue? Does it go to pay for things other than transportation? And I think we need to take that issue off the table. And the sooner we can do it, the better. We are woefully underfunded on what we do. We're thankful to the legislating 2017 and $5.3 billion for new things. It's a lot of money, but it's not enough. And so I think we need to say that whatever revenues derived from this system, to be consistent with the constitutional language in place currently and the guidance in House Bill 2017, that all revenue derived from tolling and congestion pricing in this corridor be deposited in the Transportation Trust Fund that's identified in the bill and used to mitigate congestion. And that can come in a lot of ways. It can be adding capacity through additional lanes. It can be adding capacity by putting more people in cars, by enhancing transit. There are a lot of ways to add capacity to get more people around the same amount of space. So, and that was commission. So I think we need to take that off the table. We've heard from the people in Clark County that they feel like they're being singled out and discriminated against. That is not the case, and it should not be the case. But I think we have to stick to the facts. The facts are they have had a couple options posed to them to alleviate that congestion, to build a new bridge. Funding for a Columbia River crossing did not fail on the Oregon side of the Columbia. It was not supported in Washington. That is a fact. There's nothing kind of touchy-feely about it. That is the fact. So we don't have a new bridge because we didn't get all the funding pieces put together to support it. So they played a role in that. They don't have a transit option because a transit option was posed to them and they voted it down. So that is a fact. So they should not be singled out, but they are not victims in this discussion. They are active members of our community. The reality is that transportation infrastructure of using fuel taxes to fund it are inadequate as vehicles have become more efficient. The only people who are truly paying for their cost of infrastructure is trucking through weight distance. And so I think we should look at, hey, how should they be treated in this tolling conversation? And what should freight corridors look like? Are there things we should be doing to ease congestion that are connecting 26 to 30 and to North Portland? And we should study that. We should say, what does it look like? We should study it sooner rather than later. And we should look at where the private sector can play in this. will private sector help fund and pay themselves back through tolling? But I think that our work here needs to be comprehensive, and we don't have money to do it. This money and look at what we can do, build a more comprehensive plan that is honest, where it's treating all the congestion equally, and creating options for people to get around, and incentives for them to work and commute differently. And I think that's kind of been a summation of my learnings in this process. Our best example of how this effectively works is Puget Sound. It's Washington State. They have implemented in Seattle congestion pricing and tolling. They have added capacity. They've added options for people. So it's really, it would seem fair. You guys can't do what we have done in Washington State, and what we've done successfully in Washington State. They are our best example of best practices. We want to learn from them how it works. We want to learn from them how they put it in place and what hiccups they had. But I think we have to address it honestly, directly. It is a point of view that was put together on this, but we are not bound by it. I'm not trying to discount the work that has been done. I'm trying to clarify the language that is in the legislation. So we did not need to do this. I think it's very, very important that we heard a broad segment of public opinion on this. We heard from neighbors in communities that would potentially be impacted. We heard from different industries. We really heard from a lot of people and a lot of different voices. I don't think there's a system or a plan we can put in place that will solve all their concerns or address all of them. And I think what we want to do is eyes wide open and try to minimize the unintended consequences that will result from us implementing congestion pricing. And with that, I'll stop my monologue, but do just want to say that I've learned a lot from this. I'm greatly appreciative of those who've put a lot of time and effort into it to get us a truly honest perspective of the problem and what people's concerns are. Some of them selfish, some of them big thinking, and it's interesting. We had a handful of kind of fairly young people come and speak forward, more millennials, and I'm not generalizing, but I would say that yeah, we have to do this, and that and really somewhat supportive of us moving forward with it. So I think we have an opportunity at hand, and I think if the commission doesn't act, it will be defined by others in ways that will put a system in place that isn't really what we want. So I think we need to act and crafting language on a number of things. I think first and foremost should be that revenue derived from any congestion or tolling would be placed in a trust fund that would be used to mitigate congestion at the discretion of the commission. It's consistent constitutionally and under HB 2017, and we should take as many of these unknown variables that are causing people anxiety off the table, so that what we present to federal highways is a step in a multi-tiered path that we're all going to walk, right? So, and maybe the first phase may be 217 or 205 and I-5, but I think we really do ourselves a disservice if we look solely there. And I think we run the risk of it being derailed by it being lopsided. I think we need to be comprehensive, and I think we need to move forward on getting the information and the impact on a comprehensive proposal.
Thank you. I obviously second all of Sean's comments, and I think they're very important for this conversation going forward, because he's being very honest and very blunt and very explicit about the current state that we're in and how do we move forward out of that situation and these circumstances. And I do believe that those that are making attempts to derail this process definitely need to look in the mirror and question their own personal self-motivated interests as it relates to our entire state, and not only our entire state, as it relates to our state and our neighboring sister states, or partner states, as I think about the metropolitan region, as it does include Clark County. But this process was definitely informative, enlightening, or inspiring, and encouraging, the fact that so many people were able to roll up their sleeves and come to the table with different interests to find a unified consensus on what would be a practical solution moving forward as it relates to our highest pressing needs as a state, which is congestion in the metropolitan region. Most want to take my hat off to all the staff and Ryan and his team and the consultant team and everybody who spent a lot of hours on this process, and all the outreach that was conducted and all the public forums that were convened, and just the tireless effort that everybody worked on to try to achieve something that could actually be transformative for our state and our region and our most pressing needs. So I definitely want to but one of the things that is kind of funny to me is the fact that 100 years ago, Oregon was an innovator, right? As the first state to pass a gas tax. And so it's was what carried us through the 20th century. And now we have different needs, different modes, different demands, different issues, different challenges. And for the 21st century, I would personally assume that our predecessors are rolling in their graves the fact that we are not leading the effort and the conversation following have got off their butts and just said, this is what we got to do for the best interest of the public. And after our Tri-State Commission trip to California a couple days ago, I learned a lot. And the fact that these other places, Washington, California, are leading the effort around congestion pricing and other modes of, and other concepts around funding and moving people, goods, services, products through, and other modes of transportation. I feel like we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice, the fact that we are behind the curve and we're playing catch up now. And what are we going to do about it? And so the legislature obviously has taken note, and with House Bill 2017, it has enabled us to finally get to a place where we can start having these realistic conversations about our future. And so that is something that I think we have to definitely focus on really heavily going forward, because today, we have no idea what the demand and needs will be next week or next month, or even for that fact tomorrow, because some new technology may pop up. And so as we look at this system holistically and our highest and pressing needs and the demand of the public and our businesses and everybody that utilizes this infrastructure system, we can see what the ROI is on that investment. And I believe for the 20th century, people see what that ROI is on that investment, and that ROI is definitely aging. But as we look to the 21st century, not only are we going to have to sustain our 20th century investments, but we're going to have to find new ways to build our infrastructure for our future generations. And so we don't know what that looks like. And as innovation and technology is definitely changing our whole landscape for everything that we operate in, it's going to be prudent that we as a commission and all of our other stakeholders and constituents focus on what it is that we're going to do with our highest and pressing needs. Because even though we got $5.3 billion, the needs are drastically higher than that. And so as I've consistently have put out there and continue to do and continue will, is that my highest priority is making sure that the public can see, feel, and experience the ROI on their investment. Because if not, we're going to be faced with some very grave challenges in our future. And that's the last thing we want to put in, the last position we want to put ourselves in. And how do we get to a place where we are to come to Oregon and figure out and understand and learn as best practices of how we transformed our infrastructure for the 21st century for our future generations. And so with that, that's what inspires me, encourages me, and I feel like this process is just one step in that direction, and I'm excited about the next steps. So thank you.
well said. It's also ironic that part of our system was paid for through tolls back in the day. So Oregon, it's not a new conversation, but it is for our generation to be talking about this. Commissioner Callery, Commissioner Van Brockland, any comments that you'd like to state at this point? We do have a two-step process. So first we have the application that we are directed to provide to the Federal Highway Administration. And then we also have the next steps of the additional capacity within the region. So I'd look to both of you if you have particular comments that you'd like to, please, go right ahead.
Well, not a resident of the Portland metropolitan area, excuse me. I'm often a user of the system in the community. And I've talked with a lot of the freight movers from Southern Oregon. This is an issue that is affecting everyone's bottom line. And it's not just Southern Oregon, it's everything that has to flow through that I-5, 205, 84 system. And we've got to find some solutions. And it's going to be a mix of things. My fellow commissioners have stated very bluntly and accurately that we have to look at a greater system analysis, and I think that's critical too. There's going to have to be capacity improvements, but there's also going to have to be capacity improvements that aren't simply infrastructure additions. We have to look at how do we get people to better utilize the system by eliminating, to the extent possible, single occupancy vehicles, or finding another way for them to get to where they want to be. Portland has a pretty decent transit system. I've used it. I used to use it a lot more. But all of these things have to fit into that picture. I think a resident of the Portland metropolitan area, and I'm including Clark County here, are in the long term going to be beneficiaries of what we start here, because this is simply a start. I know Clark County residents have concerns about, well, they work in Oregon, but they pay taxes, but why should they have to pay a toll? And that's what they chose to do. That's where the job was that they chose to pursue. So in the long term, whatever we do, they are going to benefit from it. And I think eventually they're going to have to look at I-5 and I-205 in Clark County, and how does it become part of this overall system analysis and the improvements that need to be made to make the system work at a higher rate of efficiency.
Excellent, thank you. Please, Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a few observations. The first one is that we have a growing problem with congestion in the Portland metro region. I think the difference between being in Portland in 2014 and being in Portland in 2018 is noticeable, and it's not going the right direction. Projections for Portland are that we're going to have another 500,000 people in the region in the short planning horizon. And so it's not going to get better by doing nothing. And I want to compliment the legislature and the governor for recognizing that in passing HB 2017, which mandates the Transportation Commission to establish a congestion pricing program. That's what the legislation says. And specifically to submit for approval to FHWA congestion pricing concepts on the I-205 segment and on the I-5 segment from the language in the bill is from where those two interstates intersect to the Washington border. I think a couple of other things that are important for people to keep in mind. Our systems in the past have been, maybe most importantly, our regional light rail system was substantially funded by the federal government. The expansion of the I-84 freeway from 4 to 6 lanes. I know this because I was involved in it. Was funded 90% by the federal government. The first TriMet line, the first line of MAX. This is not the case anymore. The federal government has substantially diminished its involvement in these programs. That puts the responsibility at the state and local level. And again, the legislature recognized that in passing 2017, and I think appropriately so. That bill, $5.3 billion is a lot of money. But that bill doesn't even address it. So we have look at what we're doing with the money from the bill. We're largely using it to fix things. We're not using it to enhance the system. So it's not enough. I know everyone says, treat with it. Here's the honest truth. No. Federal government is not a partner to a much larger extent than we have been. And $5.3 billion doesn't, and we knew from elsewhere. We're going to have to raise it. The alternative is it's going to get worse. It's potentially going to get a lot worse in the metro area. And why everyone in the state should be concerned about that is exactly what Commissioner Callery said, which is this affects everybody in the state, because if you can't get goods to market and you can't get through the Portland metro area, that's a problem. And it's a statewide problem, which is why the legislature is trying to address it, and it's why we're trying to address it. I think that the last thing I'd like to say is, when we look at what we're facing, and several commissioners, starting with Commissioner O'Halloran, have mentioned this, we're going to have to think creatively, and we're going to have to think in a multimodal way about this, because own option for them. They can't afford Uber, and recognize that population and help serve it. We have to, so there are equity issues. There are these diversion issues which we need to try and get our arms around and try and address as best we can. And there are a number of other issues that have been raised in the process, which Commissioners O'Halloran and Simpson led. But I think we need to remain committed to the multimodal model and build a system that relies on transit, relies on creative solutions to how we use the lanes we have, HOVs, in order to address congestion. I don't think there is any city or state in the country that can point to simply adding lane after lane after lane of interstate, which is very expensive, by the way, and solving the problem. I mean, look at Seattle. Seattle is much worse than Portland is, and they have a lot more runway. They have a lot more concrete on the ground, and they have terrible congestion. We were just in San Francisco this week. The commission was. They have a lot of pavement in the Bay Area, and they're congested. So we have a little bit of a head start because we at least built the light rail system. But we're going to have to do a lot more, and it's going to have to be multimodal in nature. So I think as we get into the remainder of this discussion, I think we need to be not only a lead starts, because you can't do anything without money. This is a money issue to begin with. But then how we use that money. And I'll close by saying, and this will put my lawyer hat on here, we are prohibited by the Oregon Constitution from using any tolling money on anything other than the highway system. We can't spend it on transit. We can't spend it on anything else. We are limited by the state constitution. So if people are out there running around saying we're going to use it to build homeless shelters in Portland, or we're going to use it for methadone maintenance clinics, or we're going to use it, we're going to throw it away on things that don't solve congestion, we can't. It's unconstitutional. So with that, I just I'm ready to turn to I have some specific questions, and I'll go in whatever order you want us to go in. Thank you.
And I would underscore this constitutional restriction. It also isn't the right thing to do. So I think that our commission is committed to making sure that we are addressing a problem, not creating more problems on the backs of those that are paying for the system. I would submit that, I'm encouraged with the continued dialogue with our partners in Washington State. And I think that this is going to be something, I'm certain that they're sharing some of the challenge, disadvantage community members that are coming into our state and working. How do we make sure that we are honoring our partnerships that we've had in the past? And so I continue to be encouraged by that dialogue, although it is spirited, and I share some of their concerns. We have the same analysis that we need to do, advantage those that are using the system for their own economic prosperity. And so I appreciate the comments of all of my colleagues. As you can tell, we are passionate about this issue and wanting to do the right thing. So we do have a two-phase approach, and Ryan, so we have the application first, and we have the PAC recommendation of what the PAC would like us to consider in terms of our application to federal highways. I am hearing a bit of maybe some adjustments to that, so I want to turn it to the commission members and ask for your comments. We need to offer specificity to the team to be able to go back and put that into the application.
So maybe we could have
Commissioner, and let me start. We're going to be taking to move forward with those projects, looking at that, what are the types of analysis that we need to go do, and making sure that we're sufficiently asking and answering all of things into the future. But the application really is about identifying the projects, identifying where those projects would be, and identifying the outcomes that we hope to get from those. And I may turn to these folks to ask a little bit more, but before I do, I did just want to make sure, I wanted to make sure I'm capturing everything that you've mentioned in terms of specifics that we can also be incorporating into the application as it relates to moving forward with that, which is some of it is messaging and some of it is specific things about that. One of them is congestion is getting worse. We cannot build capacity or even maintain the system without some additional revenue. Making sure we're clear about this in our communication effort, that this is about reducing congestion that's affecting the entire state, that it's having impacts across the state, and that we need to make sure we're addressing those. What are the uses? Answer the question as to what are the uses of the revenue, and trying to be clear about that up front. And as part of our application, I think that would be desirable in terms of trying to describe what it is we're trying to achieve with this. So the revenue uses need to be consistent with the state gas tax, or with the constitutional restriction for the trust fund, and must be used to mitigate congestion. We need to be encouraging folks to use the system less and to improve the efficiency of the system. We need to be thinking about freight and how they are treated through this tolling process, and so that's something we can identify as part of that work program. Making sure this effort is giving people choices in how they move around, and that multimodal has to be part. And so right now we have the two projects that the PAC has recommended. And so I think what we're looking for from you today is, are those the two projects? And if so, what are the kinds of elements and other policy considerations or in our application, so that we're describing it accurately what it is we're proposing to do. And a lot of these things are going to be developed over the next several months, but hearing some direction from you early will be really helpful, and then we can be in communication with you throughout that. I'm going to ask Judith and if
the requirement of section that.
a little bit in jest, but what if we don't meet this deadline, and what if we don't do it? Do we have frustrated? What are the consequences of us not meeting this deadline?
I think you'll need somebody besides your project manager for that question.
Well, I think the answer is, Commissioner, that we would have some exposure to maybe a mandamus action in court requiring us to comply with the law. That it would have to be someone trying to enforce the December 31 deadline on us, which is in statute. I think that's where the action would be, probably Marion County Circuit Court.
Well, then it wouldn't be honoring the commitment that we made through the legislation of House Bill 2017. But I think you're right. There isn't a birthday that goes away. It's
right. And let me clarify. I'm not suggesting we don't meet it. I'm just asking what are the consequences if we were to somehow miss it. So.
And this phase, at least from now into what date, is I would assume it's got to be like a draft development document, and then the commission will have another opportunity to kind of weigh in on that content that's going to be presented forward in a final document to the Federal Highways.
And I think given the timeline and with our workshop that we have in October, it was my understanding this would come back in November, and we would have a dialogue about the content of that, and then for a December.
At the workshop?
It would be in November. Our workshop, I think, takes us out a month, and so it's going to put us into November
The
to
November
have this
meeting.
discussion.
So then, okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
I understand.
I don't want to get arrested.
That,
Fair
that,
enough.
no, it wouldn't be criminal. It would,
I would,
it would be
I'd-
civil.
I'd come visit you. I weren't in there with you.
Just give me some sneakers, that's all I need.
One comment, I've had the opportunity, I guess, over the last month and a half, where I have been cornered by a couple of legislators who would be very, very disappointed and upset.
And I do want to recognize that partnership and commitment, again, that we made. I'm not hearing you suggest that. I think it's just how far can we go, and now we know where that is. It doesn't sound as though that's the direction that we'd like to go. But we do need to offer that specificity in terms of we could start with the PAC recommendation. Are there amendments to the PAC recommendation that we would like to propose? We recognize the great work, but again, it is advisory to this body. We have the ultimate authority to make a decision. So,
Madam Chair, I would argue that the amount of work, again, that staff and all the stakeholders put into getting to this place, it would be, in my mind, kind of offensive if we did anything otherwise than to support the recommendation that was brought forward by all the stakeholders that invested their time in this 8-month process.
okay.
Yeah,
Please.
and I agree with that, and again, I greatly appreciate the work that has been done both inside and outside of ODOT. And Madam Chair, so we do have the legislative mandate, and we have to, and we're on a timeline, on a ticking clock to have a proposal. I would suggest that we move forward with the recommendation, but that concurrently we develop a comprehensive plan. The timing for implementation of tolling on those corridors is still something that we have flexibility on. That we immediately begin studying and taking the steps forward to creating a loop, a donut, a beltway, a cordon around the Portland metropolitan area, and that we look at this comprehensively about what imposing congestion pricing on that entire corridor would look like. I realize this takes a long time to do, but I think politically, we are going to be very vulnerable to criticism that we are singling out communities, and specifically those in Vancouver, if we only look at these corridors. And I think we are not being honest about the problem if we only look at these corridors. So I think we immediately need to look at creating a seamless loop around Portland area, Fruit Loop, whatever you want to call it, the donut, the beltway.
Are we getting hungry?
Yeah, but it's, but I mean, yeah, we need to draw that loop, and it needs to, I think anyone who travels 217 on a daily basis, or is on 426, none of these people are going to say that congestion only happens on 205 and 5. It's just, I mean, it's a farce. The congestion on 26 backs up to Hillsborough from 405. So it is a problem all over, and we need to address it all over. And the sooner we accept that and get working on what it's going to look like, studying it, doing the feasibility, the environmental impact, the whatever, the better we're going to be. And I think there's been people who've said, "Hey, I don't represent that corridor, and that you guys are being instructed to look at. Therefore, it's not a big deal." But I think we should move forward with this, but as a component of a more comprehensive integral system that creates a seamless loop around the Portland metropolitan area.
And Commissioner, just quickly, That is our proposed next step. That's the
Okay.
thing that we're going to be talking about directly after this, and I think you've spoiled probably 80% of Judith's potential presentation
I
now.
drove 6 hours.
But I just want you to know, we have heard this loud and clear. We have heard this from the PAC itself. We've heard it from the commission, and we do have a proposal in terms of how to move that forward, because we understand that while moving forward with this action, if that's what the commission chooses to do in these two projects, that there is a larger comprehensive system and that we need to make sure it's integrated and that we need to be looking at the broader picture. And we have a proposal to talk with you about immediately following this action.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sorry to get ahead of your skis here, but I also, I think that what we talked about on how we're applying any revenue produced through this, I think that needs to be clarified. And the more of these issues we can bring clarity to, and so I would think we would want to ODOT in conjunction with, I don't know if it's Department of Revenue and Justice, whatever, to make sure that we're constitutionally consistent, but I mean, just with our legal counsel, that these funds be committed to the trust fund identified in the legislation. And if, if there needs to be a change in law or constitution, that we know what that is and what we need to ask for. So anyway, I'd just have that be a piece of it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to bookmark some of those comments, and we're going to put it into the second part of this conversation. Commissioner, please.
So a couple of things. One, because I wasn't on the PAC, I'd just like to kind of review one question.
That's solvable.
Yeah, exactly. And that is B and modified E, which is what's being proposed, versus C. Could you just give me the executive summary of how the PAC got to B and modified E over C?
Those two specific projects, there was clumsily, there was a lot of discussion in the end. And I think you are probably visualizing, so.
Oh, yeah.
But anybody who's not, B is the one on I-5 through Portland, and modified E is at the Abernathy Bridge on 205.
Correct.
Whereas C was to toll all lanes of both freeways for the entire study area. In the end, first of all, the consultant recommendation was to take a phased approach, so we would begin with those as initial projects. We have a lot to learn still on those two projects, and then to go further with consideration of Concept C, because Concept C does have a lot of really favorable performance issues. It does very well.
Right.
It also raises a lot more, though, for me as a project manager, I can tell you that I look at those, even between Oregon City and Central Portland, are wildly different. How they would affect our neighbors to the north are very, very different. So I think that most people felt that it was a good opportunity, and I think the project team agreed that these were the two projects that got at the most critical locations and gave us an opportunity to begin advancing congestion pricing.
So thank you, and I'm comfortable with that answer, and I'm comfortable supporting it's the department's recommendation. I do want to touch on the statute itself for a second, because I'm trying to start there, so I do. So Section 120, to me, says a number of things that are helpful. One, with respect to Commissioner O'Halloran's last comment, which I completely agree with, that it is and I'm sure everyone here who's looked at it agrees with, I hope, is that it's a regional problem. It involves all of these major arteries, these interstate segments, and that we have to do a comprehensive look at the region for a number of reasons, foremostly to deal with congestion effectively region-wide, but secondarily to, I think, take advantage of what is in the statute, which is at Section 120 sub 4, and reads that in addition to the two areas mentioned in the bill, specifically 205 and 5, that, quote, limit us to the region. I mean, if there were an issue in Eugene or Medford or somewhere else, the commission could impose it outside the Portland metro area. specifically, though, with respect to the recommendation for B and modified E, the language in the bill says that we have three things to do: seek approval, receive FHWA approval, seek approval, receive approval, implement. And when you get to the implementation phase, at section 3 of 120, implement value price 5, Interstate 5, it says on Interstate 5 beginning at the Washington state line and ending where it intersects with Interstate 205. That is essentially, apart from whether we do one or more lanes, that is essentially that entire U that was on your slide. I think discretion to do that. However, I think in our motion today, and I've written one, that we should add a reference with respect to the global look, which is the second part, that we specifically reference including those segments of 205 and 5 not addressed in this first phase. And the reason I think we should call them out specifically is because the statute talks about the state line to the intersection of I-5 and I-205. Could you make an argument that you don't need them? Sure. Is it better to have them? I think so. So it's just an add-on at the end, and as I say, I wrote it last night because what I don't want to have happen is someone to argue who might be concerned about congestion pricing that we have not met the statutory mandate. It is a mandate. I think we should be able to point to it specifically.
Questions came up that, and of course, the advice that came back said the commission has authority to do so under the existing statute, ORS 383, that was in existence before HB 2017 and under HB 2017. But their review of the statute and the underlying legislative record, and they spent a lot of time listening to hearings, listening to floor debates, et cetera, indicated that legislative intent was to require that the commission implement tolling within those two corridors, not necessarily the entirety of the two corridors. But I totally agree with your suggestion in the sense that the statute does say those two corridors.
Yeah, and you don't get to the legislative history. And believe me, I've been through this hundreds of times in cases. I don't want to be arguing that we can't get to legislative intent because there's no ambiguity in the statute and we have to do the whole thing. It's a minor clarification, but I think important implications in terms of communicating and in terms of just making sure that we have a motion that says we are going to look at those other sections. So I would just call it out at the end of this motion. As I say, I've written one, and I'm happy to circulate it to the commissioners by email so they can look at it. I think it's what we should do, in my view.
And Commissioner, I appreciate you pointing that out because I think as we talk about a communication plan to the public, there is a recognition that if we only were to look at these two segments, that we know enough now that we, in its entirety, will need to be addressed and analyzed. And so how we recognize that alongside this commitment of an application, I think also tells the general public that there is more to be had.
Proposal that the PAC developed and that you're quite aware, but it's out there as an issue. And Senator Murray has said, let's, in her letter to us, let's keep open the dialogue about what that ought to look like. So that's another reason to call it out, that we can say to her, we actually, we did not go with C, which was her concern in her letter, patients for that bridge, challenge to whether or not we complied with the statute. I wanted to circulate
much on that.
This.
Well, let's put as much of us be ready for a motion in November. So instead of
suggest something along these lines, and I'm not making the motion right now. In order to begin to establish a traffic congestion relief program, as we are mandated by the Oregon legislature to establish, between Northeast Going Street, Alberta Street, and Southwest, could be the wrong date. You might roll your eyes. We're conducting a system-wide, it's a scope of work for for conducting a system, the entire 5 in the Portland region, not included in.
In support, any comments or other suggestions?
It doesn't limit us in scope to 205 and 5. I mean, yeah.
That might be better.
Yeah, and because I do think that if it's viewed as us not taking a comprehensive.
Yeah, no, it says comprehensive. Holleran, I definitely, I do. This second piece is so important.
Thing. I was looking for it in 2 motions versus 1 motion. I think it's fine to do it as 1 motion that's more comprehensive. But if we are going to take it that way, maybe we should just quickly let proposing in terms of that study so that that motion could then just incorporate both acts.
Not approving the I think what you're hearing is that area, so that
with the direction that we're looking for today, and then submitting the application would be the direction that we would be looking for in November.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
So Madam Chair,
Please.
we would make a motion today to
okay.
move forward, right?
Okay.
So I think that, and you guys are looking for that from us.
Very good.
And that if we're to meet the timeline for our application to federal highways, we really need to.
And is January 31, 2019 a reasonable date?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of bringing that back to you as well, and
approach.
and I think what we'd like
We're
to
looking
do,
for a scope of work to go do the feasibility on the comprehensive, which I assume would be in 2019, that work would get done.
And I think what we would like to do is to bring you back the application for approval and submission to FHWA in November, as well as a approach and a layout and a framework for that scope that you're talking about, and then we can come back with even a more refined scope in December if that's what the Commission desires.
So that motion will be what okay, very good. So please, yes, would you like to part 2 of the
Let me
presentation?
just show you, because I think that we can be really quick and show you that, because it's a PowerPoint.
Before you go to that, can I just, as I was writing while you were talking, but mitigation strategies to address inequity and diversion, that's on there, right? And then the other things were things that were mentioned in the director's memo. So as you go through the memo, I want to make sure you're picking up his bullet points that were things that you would put into this. So I thought those were important and they're already in there. I can point to specifically what those are if you want me to. Let me just flip to those. So they're at the bottom of page 2 with respect to commission input requested. There are 4 bullets at the end of that page. I think those should be elements. One was eligibility and operating requirements, guidance on federal project development, assistance on identifying process components. Those seemed important. And then there were, that may have been it. I just want to make sure we're picking those up too.
Yes.
Because I thought those were important to have in the scope of what you're doing. Thank you.
The reason that we split them into 2 was just because we really wanted to make sure that we didn't leave this room without the direction to stay on track for that legislative mandate. But the 2 topics go together. And so I have only 3 slides to share with you, and I don't think I have to go into a lot, but simply the interest in a comprehensive system plan, not only for looking at the whole system, but also for looking at the future. Because the feasibility analysis was really very much at a nearer term. We looked at 10 years out, kind of. So, but there was a lot of folks talked about we need to have a plan for how we are going to accommodate growth, and sometimes needing additional capacity in roadways and transit. So we've identified the regional freeway system, and I think that Commissioner O'Halloran's inclusion of Highway 30 or other systems makes sense. And as we go forward, working with partners, we may be doing integration with local streets as well, because I know the city of Portland is really interested in integrating. This slide, the issues to explore, these are just some of the questions that we still have. We learned a lot during that first feasibility analysis. These first 3 bullets, identifying the priority objectives for a system-wide pricing program, developing performance measures, knowing, what does it mean when we've succeeded? How are we going to prioritize next projects? Identifying federal requirements. A lot of that will come straight out of the feasibility analysis, at least as a beginning. but we might need to reconsider some things, like performance measures might be a little different as we look at growth. But it really is that, considering how it could be used in accommodating growth. That's a different thing when we look at it in that holistic way. That last bullet, I kind of want to apologize for that sentence. Develop a phasing strategy for maximum system performance during implementation. It's a very confusing sentence, and I realized that later. But what I was thinking about then was, as we're advancing the initial projects, and then thinking about how we can be learning from that as we're also planning for the future. Because we'll have a whole new, it's more complex, but we'll have a lot of good information while we're doing that. So we want to be thinking of it that way. So these are just some of the questions. You've raised others, and we've noted those, and that will help us. When I kind of outline out what I think that we would be including in a draft approach for you to consider later, it's first of all getting grounded in the policies and purpose of the framework. With this feasibility analysis, we had section 120, which identified congestion pricing for, and we also had the charter. And so there was specific to managing congestion and funding bottlenecks. It may be a little bit different as we look about the future. It may not be. So we would start probably with some of the good work that's been done, as well as quite a lot of existing policies and planning work. Defining, we've got our own regional freeway system, but we may sometimes go beyond that. And of course, getting to the endpoints, to the north with the Columbia River, and seeing what that would mean in terms of the project partners and what that would entail, as well as to the south with the Boone Bridge or others, some of the local jurisdictions. So the timing and analysis with integration with those two initial projects, again, that's something that is a great opportunity, but it's also a complexity. So I don't think that you're going to want us to wait. I've heard that. So how can we move forward with both, but still integrate in or somehow dovetail those two processes while we're taking a much deeper level of analysis for the initial projects, trying to take a broad analysis for the whole system and get those two aligned. And so all of those things we would be working on back at the office and talking to some of our partners to come back and know what are the different ways of approaching that in terms of the resource needs for staff, for consulting support, what is the timeline, and how might that get integrated. So what we would be bringing back is an approach for your consideration later to get that direction then. And that's why I actually like the January timeline, because it gives us a little bit more time after coming with the initial projects to then take that and fold it in. So I think that's why we said yes when you asked about that timeline.
So one of the things that we know is that technology is changing as we sit here. How do we take into account congestion pricing tolling? Is just, if you look up the toolbox right now, we have a screwdriver and an Allen wrench. Mm-hmm. So I mean, we're adding to our kit of things that we can actually be implementing to be able to address congestion. So how does that emerging technology and a variety of other things that are coming online play into what we look for in terms of this long-range plan?
Yeah, thank you. So the consideration of congestion pricing, the very concept of it itself is an economic one. And so as a result, the pricing application and the concept doesn't change with technology. It is a economic-driven function, and that does provide some balance between supply and demand. What does change with technology is the interaction with those economics. So we have the emergence of connected and automated vehicles, certainly as well shared mobility providers, which may or may not be as responsive to the pricing decisions. We have the requirements for electronic toll collection payments. Today, they're done through transponders or through license plate readers, but it's very easily seen in the future that those could be in-vehicle embedded systems. All of these aspects, I think, are independent from the application of pricing. What I like to think about pricing is as a traffic management tool, very much in the same vein as ramp metering, very much in the same vein as variable speed limits and other types of traffic management strategies that we apply. So in the context of the system-wide consideration, it's largely a reflection of concepts B&E as being an initial implementation that gives immediate benefits and allows the public to buy in and obtain some trust that pricing is a strategy that will work for the future. but also gearing it for a system-wide aspect that reflects not only the current situation on the ground today, but also some of those future technologies, future strategies, and future interactions with a transportation system that may be different from today.
It was interesting, we were just in the tri-state meeting that you heard about, and VMT is up, and so we're actually seeing more people using the shared resources and shared mobility. And I just wonder how that factors into, as we're looking at congestion, we're looking at capacity, we're increasing capacity, and so I suspect that all of that comes into the scope of work in terms of we're not basing that just obviously on today's, but technology could be actually adding to the system versus reducing from the system. And depending on how we add to transit and our traditional ways of getting people out of a single occupancy vehicle, we may be creating more trips. So anyway, thank you.
I have one question. At what point does the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA process, kick in? And does it include the entire corridor, for example? Or can you focus it on the various projects, Abernathy Bridge, the Portland Central Core, and still make the commitments to NEPA in the long term?
The answer to that question is what we are going to be working with Federal Highway over the next several months in trying to, and then when we bring to you is going to be a description of how we plan to go forward with that question. So I don't know if we are going to have maybe Judith wants to help answer this too, but the exact way that we'll apply that exactly, is it a court? It will still involve talking with all the folks and looking at impacts in all of those areas, if that's the question. But what's the interaction of that? What's the scope of that? What are the details of all that? Are things that we're going to try to outline in greater detail as we develop the application? And we're doing that in conversation with OHW about how to best do that and making sure that we are checking all of the process boxes that we need to, as well as addressing all the impacts that we're encountering through the corridors.
Well, my comment is driven by past experience dealing with federal agencies and the NEPA process. So you start the NEPA process and you say, we're going to do it for this particular segment. Then you come back to them 6 months, okay, now we're going to move here. And they say, why didn't you tell us about this in the beginning? Now you're going to have to start the NEPA process over. So just concern.
Well, yes. So we have had many conversations with Federal Highway Administration, and they've been very available. And will continue to be, and we have a follow-up meeting next week scheduled already. Because we have 2 construction projects already underway, and then we have this tolling project being added. So that's why it's so important that at this stage we define this, what we'll be working on over the next couple of months is defining what we're planning to do and making sure that we can get some concurrence about what requirements, how we're going to meet those requirements. So your question and concern, I think, is well taken.
Thank you.
Ms. Gray, did you have a comment previously?
No, I actually was just going to say that that was it.
Okay.
That I only had those slides and
Okay.
then to ask
Very
for the
good.
direction here, which
Okay.
I think we've heard. So.
Okay, so what is the will of the commission at this point? Do we feel ready to move forward with our motion? Let's go ahead and just put it on the record, and we'll just go ahead and say it. And thank you very much. I know that you need to hit the road, and thank you for making the trip and for your partnership and the commitment of time, too. Thank you. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
More to come. Please.
Madam Chair and members of the Commission, in order to begin to establish a traffic congestion relief program, as we are mandated by the Oregon Legislature to establish, I move that the Oregon Transportation Commission direct ODOT to 1, prepare an application for submission to the Federal Highway Administration requesting FHWA approval to implement congestion pricing on Interstate 5, with the first phase being between Northeast Going Street, Alberta Street, and Southwest Multnomah Boulevard, and on Interstate 205 on or near the Abernathy Bridge. And 2, not later than January 31st, 2019, develop a scope of work for conducting a system-wide congestion feasibility analysis on the entire Portland metropolitan area freeway system, including but not limited to those segments of I-5 and I-205 in the Portland region not included in the first phase.
Excellent. Further discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Wonderful work. And we actually, 5 minutes early. Well done, team. Yes, please.
Madam Chair, and I also, with clarity, Commissioner Van Brockland, do we want to make a motion, either revenue that would be here, or is that part of the proposal, or would we want a separate proposal giving guidance to develop revenue? And I think we have an opportunity to clarify that now, even if we have to come back and ratify the specific statutory language that would be in place. But I think there's an opportunity now, and I think it's one thing we could take off the table.
Commissioner O'Halloran, I agree, and I would, maybe we need a second motion, and I think you've just essentially made it that this, that what we see coming back to us later in the year include a section that discusses funding, restrictions on funding, and the fund that is established in the statute where we're required under law to place all proceeds from congestion pricing, that all proceeds have to go into this fund under statute by law. So I think if we could have that be part of this to recount all that in what comes forward, I think that would be very valuable. So I agree with the commissioner, and if you want to turn that into a motion, fire away.
I would, maybe the motion would be to amend what we just approved to include application of funding derived from this in there, and that we would have language clarifying that as part of what you come back to us with. Is that enough of a motion, or do we need to clarify more?
I'd like to ask, oh, I'm sorry.
Sean, going back to one of your earlier statements, see if this captures it with a little more intentionality. During your comments, you made the suggestion to instruct the department on placing toll revenue in the congestion relief fund as articulated in House Bill 2017, consistent with the highway trust fund disciplines as well. I think your earlier...
And the Oregon Constitution.
Correct.
Yep.
And, yeah.
Yeah, so if we could...
It should also include the Oregon Constitution because that's the ultimate legal authority here.
Well, and I think that while we recognize that is implied in what is stated, I think for the general public and concerns about addressing other community needs with these funds, any clarity that we can offer, I think, really benefits the messaging. Please.
So I think as the director articulated with those specific clarifications as articulated by Commissioner Van Brockland would be an amendment to the proposal previously agreed and just as instructions to ODOT. So with that, I would ask, Madam Chair.
So I think we vote first on the amendment and then we vote on the it as a, please.
I think that's right, Madam Chair. I think the first thing is Commissioner Van Brockland accepting it as a friendly amendment. And I think
Yes, I accept it as a friendly amendment, and let's revote.
Okay, very
So
good.
the amendment and then the amended motion.
So we are going to vote on the amendment first. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. And now we will have the amended motion, and we will not restate that because we do have that captured. I'm looking at Jackie just to verify, and it is recorded, so we can pick that up as well.
And I can email it to you, Jackie.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Wonderful job. Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Gray, thank you for your commitment and your work on this particular item, and more to come as well. So thank you. Please.
Lots happening in John Day.
Okay, next we have the monthly progress report on House Bill 2017. Mr. Brower.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, for the record, I'm Travis Brower, ODOT's Assistant Director, and I recognize I'm all that stands between you and lunch, but unfortunately I've got about 25 to 30 minutes of really important content. Just
We're
kidding.
cutting off your microphone in two. Just kidding.
That's good because that's about all I had, actually. And of course, then the opportunity for you to ask any questions, make any comments. You have in your supplemental packet, which will be posted online, the monthly dashboard. And there's a number of areas that are listed in the implementation highlights. We're doing very well in the recruiting process. We have a lot of recruitments out on the street, although as we've discussed over time, we do have occasionally some challenges in filling some of those positions, particularly some of our engineering positions and in the Portland metro region due to the higher cost of living up there. We also have now out on the street the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, or STIF. Solicitation was released last month, shortly after your last commission meeting, and we have broken that up into 2 rounds where the qualified entities can come either with an application the first round, which is due the 1st of December, with awards anticipated in April, or if they're not quite ready, they can come a little bit later. We have made contact with all of those qualified entities and have gotten sort of a preliminary understanding of when they intend to come in. So in that sense, we've made good progress in working with each of those qualified entities on when they're going to be coming in. We also have put the Safe Routes to School solicitation out on the street. You'll notice that there is an item on this to clarify just one little point in that solicitation that is on the consent calendar to sort of effectuate the direction the Commission has given us that came out of our Policy Advisory Committee on that. And then, of course, on one of the other big items, you move tolling forward. So we are really moving forward on all of these initiatives. You'll notice in here that everything is green. That is the case right now, that nothing is really falling behind. I credit that to the hard work of Kat Silva and all of the implementation managers who are working on this. But you will be the first to know if something does run into a barrier. One of the things we did on this round of the document is we put in blue some of the new text so it calls it out, and we included not just all of the initiatives that are directed by the Commission, but on the last page you'll see a dashboard that shows all of the initiatives under HB 2017 and their status, because some of them are really just internal ODOT work, but all of those things are things that you will see over time at the Commission. So with that, I'll wrap up and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Did note that everything is green, and while everything looks rosy, I would encourage that if there are areas where maybe it would have been a little yellow or not quite as green, I would encourage that we lean in that direction so that the Commission is informed about the areas that are maybe a bit more challenging. While it looks great on paper that everything is going swimmingly, I know that behind the scenes there are some that are a little bit more tenuous. So just offer that as a maybe just a comment.
Yeah, Commissioner Bainey, at some level we should do a yellow of the month, just
well, yeah, it's
something that maybe is still green, but is more challenging than others.
Yeah, I think that's vitally important. I mean, the things that are in the green are great as just quick updates. I think the things that are obviously in yellow and even potentially in red are things that we should spend more time on looking at in these types of forums.
Great. Any other comments? Okay, we're going to recess for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.